Hi there, and welcome to Breaking Barriers with yours truly, Allen Stafford. I'm your host, and I am very glad that you are here with me on this episode because today we're unpacking something that touches all of us, whether you realize it or not, and that is the weight of expectations. That is right, expectations. You know, those silent little pressures that creep into our lives that shape how we think, act, and even how we view ourselves. And sometimes we don't even notice how much they're holding us back. Now, let's talk about this time of year, the holidays. You know, they have a very funny way of magnifying these pressures. Wouldn't you agree? Especially around the holiday times. Suddenly, we're juggling expectations left and right. We want to, it's expectations about hosting the perfect dinner, buy that perfect gift, keep a big, cheerful smile on your face, even if you're running on empty and you're not feeling it. The joy of the season can get really buried under all of this invisible weight. But here's the thing, folks. These pressures, they aren't just a holiday thing, as you already know. They show up everywhere and at any time. I mean, it could be at work. Maybe you feel like you need to say yes to every project to prove your worth, right? Or in your personal life, you might feel like there's a ticking clock to hit certain milestones. For example, marriage. How many of you have thought about that? You're on a time schedule for marriage. Parenthood, you got to be a parent at a certain age, right? Or that dream career. Even our own high standards can pile on the weight of expectations. And take a moment to think about it. When was the last time you felt pressured to meet an expectation? I mean, maybe it was from a boss, a family member, or maybe it was even an expectation put upon by yourself. How did that make you feel? I mean, did it lift you up, or did that expectation kind of weigh you down? But here's the good news. These expectations, they don't have to define us. They really don't. I mean, they're not set in stone. There is no universal book. I mean, some people will argue the Bible, but that's if you're religious. But there is no universal book that says you have to behave in a certain way. Sometimes I want to think about printing a book that says, like the rules for life, and then the pages are empty. And so whenever someone says they have to do something, I hand them the book. I go, where does it say you have to do that? There's no rules. You get it? It's kind of like a joke. But they're not set in stone, folks. And today what we're going to do is figure out how to recognize them, challenge them, and rewrite the ones that no longer serve us. And there's some fascinating psychology behind all of this. This is not just pie in the sky discussion about expectations. There's actually psychology behind all of this. I mean, did you know that over time, external pressures become internalized? These pressures that we put on ourselves, we internalize these. They shape how we see ourselves and even how we experience the world. As a matter of fact, a study from MIT found that our prior beliefs, those beliefs that we've had in the past, basically what we expect to see in our lives, can actually change how we interpret reality. I mean, two people could walk into the exact same situation and have totally different experiences, all because of what they expected to find. Now think about that. Let that sink in. You walk in, let's say, to a coffee shop. Two separate people, maybe it's a friend in you or a sibling, and you walk into the coffee shop. Each of you has a different set of expectations based on a set of prior beliefs that you've already imprinted inside of your mind. I mean, that's the power of expectations. They don't just live, in the world around us. They live in our minds. They're in our heads. And if we're not careful, they can quietly take control of our lives, which we've seen in our own lives, right? Some of the expectations that are ingrained into you, that are just burned and seared into your mind, that you live for today and get frustrated over sometimes. And not all expectations are bad. We'll talk about that too. Because by the end of this episode, what I want you to do is feel lighter, metaphorically lighter, not like weight-wise. I wish I could have that power too to say, hey, you're going to feel lighter. But metaphorically, I want you to feel lighter, more in control of your own thinking, of your own thoughts. Because together, we're going to dig into how expectations form, why they can be so heavy, and most importantly, how you can start breaking free from their grip. And here's the best part. I put together a very simple, actionable worksheet to help you put what we talk about in the show into practice. Rather than just giving you a bunch of information, I've given you some actionable items on this worksheet that you can download, and I'll put the link into the show notes on my website, allenstafford.com, or you can follow the link on whatever platform you're listening to this on. There'll be a link there, so you can follow that to the show notes and download that free PDF worksheet to help you get through and learn how to deal with expectations. But for now, let's dive in. Grab your coffee, settle in, and let's start uncovering those invisible barriers. All right, now that we've set the stage, let's take a closer look at what we're really talking about here, and that's expectations. I mean, what are they, and where do they come from? To truly break free from the weight of these expectations, we first need to understand, how they work, right? Anytime we want to understand how to break free from something, we need to understand how it works. And here's a simple way to think about expectations. They're like invisible rule books, and I mean invisible. And you could even go so far as to say rule books with no pages. They're just empty pages, because these rules tell us how we're quote unquote supposed to live, work, and interact with one another. But here's the catch, folks. We rarely stop to ask who wrote these rules or if they're even helpful. I mean, are they even helpful? Sometimes they're not. I would say most of the time they're not. But let's start with the basics, okay? Societal expectations. And these are the unwritten norms passed down through cultural narratives, because that's how cultures survive and grow and expand, through stories, through these narratives. So the societal expectations are, passed down through cultural norms or narratives, family traditions, and social messages. I mean, and they're everywhere. Take a look. They're all around us, shaping how we or what we believe about success, what we believe about relationships, and even what we should believe about happiness. And think about this for a second. When you hear the word success, what comes to your mind? Is it climbing the corporate ladder? Is it buying a home or starting a family? To you, success might be, let's say, for example, climbing the corporate ladder. But to a homeless man, success might be scoring a meal for the day or filling a bag full of recyclable aluminum cans and taking it for some change. So keep that in mind, because success really is defined differently by everybody. And for many of us, those ideas, they feel very automatic, because society has been telling us for a long time that this is what success looks like. Now, that definition might work for some people, but for others, it feels like chasing a goal that does not align with who they are. And you might relate to that. And yet the pressure to conform, that's very real, isn't it, folks? To conform, it feels like it's real. But societal norms are just one piece of the puzzle. Expectations also come from closer to home, like family traditions. And these are often well-meaning, but can still be heavy to carry. For example, maybe you grew up hearing things like, you need to set an example for your siblings, if you have siblings, or do well in school so you can get a good job. Now, that's what I heard growing up all the time. Or always be polite and don't talk back. Well, I don't know if you know me or not, but I have a tendency to talk back. But I didn't when I was a kid, because I was always conditioned to always be polite and don't talk back. Now, I don't really talk back. I scratch that. I stand up for myself. I'm more assertive in my communication than I used to be. But the point is that these messages may seem harmless as we're receiving them as children, or they may even seem helpful. But over time, they shape how we see ourselves and what we believe we should achieve. And then there are the expectations we place on ourselves. And you probably are aware of that. And these are often the, hardest to recognize, because they feel like they're just part of who we are. They feel like it's what defines us, or we think that's what defines us. Maybe it's the voice in your head saying, I need to make everyone happy, or I have to do this perfectly, or I failed. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Does that sound familiar to you? I mean, these self-imposed rules can be the most exhausting of all, because they come from within, and they're constantly with us. But what's interesting is that all these expectations, whether they come from society, your family, or ourselves eventually get internalized. And over time, they stop feeling external. That means that they stop feeling like they're coming from somewhere else, and they start feeling like they're truths, like they're actual facts and truths that we have to live by. And this is where psychology can shed some light on this whole expectations. There's a concept called cognitive schemas. Basically, they're mental frameworks based on our experiences and our beliefs. And expectations essentially become these schemas. They're shortcuts our brains use to predict how we should act or what we should expect in certain situations. But here's the kicker, folks. These schemas aren't always accurate. They're built from the messages we've absorbed through our lives, and not necessarily from our own values or own experiences. Let me say that again and let that settle in. These schemas, these beliefs, these shortcuts, they're built from the messages we've absorbed as we've grown up, and they're not from our own values or our own experiences. So what does that mean? That means they can be changed, right? But let me go ahead and give you an example here. Imagine you grew up believing that success means having, let's say, a high-paying job, for example. That belief or schema might lead you to overlook other forms of success, like building meaningful relationships or doing work that fulfills you. Even if you're happy in a career that doesn't match society's definition of success, you might feel like you're falling short. So if you're pressured to be a doctor and you want to be an artist, I'm going to tell you a true story because I have a cousin that was an exceptional artist, really would have rather been an artist, but was pressured to become a doctor. And now as a doctor and a university professor at New York University, he's very successful, but I don't know that he's very happy because I remember him growing up always drawing and always wishing, and even told me that he wished he could be an artist, but his parents were pressuring him to become something more like a doctor or a lawyer. And he chose the doctor route. I probably would have chose the lawyer route, but he went that way. But my point is, he chose a career that matched society's definition of success, and he fell short of his own expectations. And this is not just how we think. You see, expectations also shape what we notice around us, which ties into the concept of confirmation bias. Our brains are wired to focus on things that confirm what we already believe. If we believe something, we're going to focus on something that's going to confirm that belief and not disconfirm that belief. So let's say you walk into a family holiday gathering expecting drama. Like, that's unheard of, right? But you walk into a family holiday expecting some sort of a drama, and your brain is primed to notice every small little disagreement, even if the overall vibe is very positive. You've got that Norman Rockwell look going on. Yep. Uncle John and Uncle Tim by the fireplace laughing with a glass of whiskey or whatever they're drinking. Kids running around, the golden retrievers laying on the carpet in front of the fireplace. But let's say someone has a disagreement. Your mind is going to pick that up and automatically tune into that if you have this predisposition or expectation that you're going to expect drama in the coming hours within that family gathering. And on the flip side, if you walk in expecting connection and joy, you'll pick up on those moments instead. Everything else I mentioned about the fireplace, the uncles talking, the kids running around playing, and that golden retriever laying there in front of the fireplace. So the point is, the expectations we carry don't just shape how we think, they shape what we perceive as real around us. And this is why it's so important to take a step back and ask, whose expectations am I carrying? And do they actually serve me? Okay, in the next segment, we're going to explore where these invisible rule books come from, how societal norms, family traditions, and personal experiences work together to shape the expectations that influence our lives. And once we understand their origins, we can start taking back control. All right, so now that we've defined or discussed what expectations are, let's go ahead and talk about where they come from. I mean, and they don't come from outer space or any specific place, but we're talking about from our behavior. Because, let's face it, none of us sat down one day and decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to hold myself I'm going to hold myself to impossible standards. These invisible rules, come from somewhere, and understanding their origins, well, that's going to be key to rewriting them, right? We got to understand where they come from before we can even dive into rewriting them. And expectations often stem from what psychologists call implicit social contracts. And these are unspoken agreements we feel bound to follow, even though we never consciously agreed to them. Think about it. No one hands you a manual saying, here's how to act, think, and achieve, but somehow we feel the pressure to conform. So where do these contracts come from? Let's break it down into three big sources: family, society, and culture. Let's start with family. For the most of us, this is where the first set of expectations, they're basically formed. You see, parents, siblings, and caregivers, they all play a role, often without even realizing it. I don't think anybody gets up and goes, I'm going to set an expectation for them today and make them live by this for the next 50, 60 years. Think about some of the messages, you might have heard growing up. Or, maybe if you're a parent, you might have said this yourself. You need to do well in school to have a bright future. That's a pretty common one. I've heard that one growing up all the time. Or you're the oldest, so you have to set an example. And again, I was the oldest, and I was always told that too. Or we don't talk about our problems outside this family. And again, that's what I was taught. I think this was specifically to me. But these are the things that I was taught growing up. But, you see these messages, they might seem innocent, right? Or they may even seem like they're helpful to you. And sometimes, they are helpful, but over time, they can create a mental framework that defines how we see ourselves. So if you've always been told to put others first, you might feel guilty anytime you prioritize your own needs. But family is just one piece of the puzzle, folks. As we grow, we start absorbing expectations from the world around us. Society is like an invisible teacher. It's constantly sending us messages about what's normal or successful. And these messages are everywhere. Where do we see them? We see them in movies, see them on social media. Ever since social media's come up, it helps define what our expectations should be. And we even see them or hear them in casual conversations. Take career paths, for example. Society often pushes the idea that success means climbing a corporate ladder, or it means buying a house, or retiring with a certain amount of money in your bank account, or, 401k or whatever retirement you have. For some people, that's going to be a great fit. But for others, it can feel like being handed a script for a play they never wanted to perform. That's right. And it doesn't stop at work, folks. Society has expectations for how we should look, act, and even celebrate. And the media is a big culprit behind this. Think about the holidays. Every ad, every Instagram post seems to tell us we should have perfectly decorated homes, elaborate meals, and expensive gifts. And the pressure to meet those standards can turn a joyful season, a happy season, folks, into one filled with what? Stress and disappointment for many. And of course, society's expectations don't exist in just a vacuum. They're often shaped by deeper cultural values that influence everything from how we define success to how we navigate our relationships. And culture adds another layer of complexity, people. Every culture on this planet has its own set of values and expectations that shape how we see the world, or how its people see the world. For example, some cultures prioritize, individual achievement, encouraging independence and personal success. Others emphasize family and community, where, the expectation might be to put collective needs above your own. And these cultural expectations, they can be a good thing. They give us a sense of identity and belonging, but they can also create tension when they clash with our personal goals. Imagine wanting to pursue a creative career in a culture that values financial stability above everything else. That internal conflict can feel like being pulled in two directions, folks. It happens all the time. And I'm living proof of it, So from family rules to societal norms to cultural values, these layers of influence work together to shape the expectations we carry. And over time, they become so deeply ingrained that we stop questioning them. They become us, who we are. And now here's why these expectations are so sticky, so to speak. They tap into something universal, our need for belonging, folks. As humans, we're wired to want acceptance and connection. Conforming to these invisible rules often feels like the easiest way to fit in, right? Psychologists call this normative influence. It's the pressure we feel to follow the behaviors and standards of the people around us. And studies show that when we see others conforming, we're more likely to do the same. Whether it's wearing the latest fashion trend, adopting certain beliefs, or following these unwritten social rules. But here's the thing, just because something is normal doesn't mean it's right for you. So in the next segment, we'll dive into why these expectations weigh us down and how to start letting go of the ones that don't serve us. But for now, take a moment to reflect, okay? Think about one expectation you've carried for as long as you can remember. Where did that come from? Did it come from family? Did it come from the society you live in or the culture you belong to? Just identifying this is a very powerful first step. All right, we've talked about what expectations are and where they come from. So now what I want to do is dive into why breaking free from them matters, if you don't already know why it matters. Because you see, the truth is these invisible weights don't just shape our thoughts. They can deeply affect how we feel, how we live, and even how we see ourselves. So let's start by talking about the toll they take on us. Let's think about carrying a heavy backpack. At first it doesn't feel so bad, right? I mean, you can manage it. You can adjust the straps and keep walking. But after miles and miles, or maybe a mile, the weight digs in. Your shoulders begin to ache, your steps begin to slow, and eventually, even if you want to keep going, you just can't. Expectations work the same way, people. They may not seem overwhelming at first, but over time, they wear us down mentally, emotionally, and even physically. Think about the expectations you set on yourself or that have been set for you and how they've impacted your life. And one of the biggest impacts of unrealistic expectations is stress. And I'm not talking about the kind of stress that motivates you to meet a deadline. I mean chronic stress, the kind that sits in the back of your mind whispering, hey, you're not doing enough, or what if you fail? Take the holidays as an example, because we're in the holiday season now. Studies have shown that stress levels tend to spike this time of year, and a lot of that has to do with expectations. I mean, there's pressure to create the perfect experience for everyone, to host, to decorate, to buy the right gifts. I mean, buying the right gifts for me has always been pressure. It's been so much pressure that I just kind of reject the holidays myself. Not really, but I mean, I kind of do, because it's just, you want to buy the right gift, but, you don't want to spend a lot of money, but you don't want people to perceive you as not, spending a lot of money. In any event, you see, and the problem lies when we feel like we're falling short. That's where our anxiety creeps in, like even with me. And psychologists often refer to this as the expectation gap. It's the space between what we think should happen and what actually does. The wider that gap is, the more likelier we are to feel disappointed, frustrated, or even, folks, resentful. Let's say you imagine a warm, harmonious family dinner, one we've talked about earlier in the show. But instead, there's tension, disagreements, or even just silence. And I don't like silence myself. But that gap between expectation and reality can even leave you feeling like you've failed, even if the evening was perfectly fine by someone else's standards. And that often happens, doesn't it? You ask someone that, how was your night? And they go, oh, it was great. Yeah, someone else, it was okay. You're going to get this different opinion because you had a different set of expectations. Now, in terms of, a deeper mental health effects on us, studies have shown that unrealistic expectations can contribute to feelings of inadequacy and low self-esteem. When we set ourselves up to meet impossible standards, we're essentially telling ourselves, you're not good enough unless you achieve this. Does that sound familiar? I know I've played that over my head in the past. And here's a statistic that might surprise you about that. According to research published in the Journal of Affective Disorders, perfectionism, which is a common byproduct of unrealistic expectations, is strongly linked to higher levels of anxiety and depression. And it makes sense, right? When your sense of worth is tied to meeting certain expectations, falling short feels devastating. It feels like you've completely failed. And don't tell me you haven't been there, because I think a lot of people have been there at one point or another in their life. And you know what, folks? It doesn't stop there. The constant pressure to live up to these invisible standards can lead to something psychologists call, and we all know this word, burnout. Because burnout isn't just about being tired. It's a state of emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion caused by prolonged stress. And once you hit that point, folks, it's hard to recover without significant change. Let that sink in for a little bit, what expectations can put upon you psychologically. And psychologists often call unrealistic expectations the silent killers of happiness. And you ask why? Well, because they create a constant sense of lack. We're always constantly sensing that we lack something. So instead of focusing on what we have, they keep us fixated on what we're missing or where we think we've fallen short. And we spend most of our time thinking about that and not on what we have. For example, imagine you've spent years chasing a version of success that was defined by someone else. Maybe it was getting a prestigious job, buying a big house, or maintaining a picture-perfect family life. And then one day you achieve those goals, but instead of feeling fulfilled, you feel empty. Now, that's because those expectations weren't aligned with your values, people. They were someone else's vision, not yours. And the same thing happens during the holidays. You might spend weeks preparing for the perfect celebration, but when the day arrives, it feels anticlimactic. That gap between the idealized version of the moment and the reality robs you of the joy that's right in front of you, folks. I've seen that happen time and again. It's real. So I ask you, why is it so important to break free from these expectations? Well, because when we don't, we live our lives for someone else's version of success, happiness, or worth. And in the process, we lose touch with what truly matters to us. And breaking free isn't about lowering your standards. It's about reclaiming control. It's about aligning your life with your values, not society's, not your family's, and definitely not some impossible ideal. And research backs this, people. A study published in the Journal of Psychological Science found that people who set goals based on their intrinsic value, like their personal growth, meaningful relationships, and authenticity, experience higher levels of life satisfaction and lower levels of stress. And on the flip side, those who chase external rewards like approval, wealth, or status often feel, unfulfilled, even when they achieve these goals. And there's a lot of truth. And you might know people like that. You might be that person yourself. But here's the beauty of breaking free. It creates space. Space to breathe, to focus, and to reconnect with yourself. Imagine letting go of the pressure to host a flawless holiday dinner and instead deciding to keep it simple, a cozy meal with loved ones, something that I prefer myself, even if the table isn't Pinterest worthy, so to speak. Imagine redefining success in your career, not as climbing the highest rung of the ladder, but as doing work that makes you feel alive. And when you let go of the expectations that don't serve you, we don't lose anything important. Instead, we gain clarity, peace, and authenticity. Think about that for a moment, folks. In the next segment, we'll talk about how to start this process, how to identify the expectations that weigh you down and rewrite them in a way that aligns with your values. But for now, I want to leave you with this question. What would it feel like to let go of just one expectation that doesn't serve you? Imagine the relief, the lightness, and the freedom. All right, so we've explored how expectations, basically weigh us down and, why breaking free matters, because if we don't understand why we should break free, then why would we break free at all, right? But now let's go ahead and shift gears and let's talk about how to do it, how we're going to break free, because, let's be honest with ourselves, folks. Recognizing these invisible rules is one thing, but changing them, that's where the real work begins, okay? So here's the good news, though. Breaking free from expectations doesn't mean, abandoning your ambition or letting people down. What it is, it's about managing the pressures, in a way that feels aligned with your values. So let's dive into 5 practical strategies that can help you lighten the load and reclaim control over your own life. First, let's talk about setting realistic goals. Expectations often feel heavy because they're vague or overly ambitious. And the key is to break them down into something, manageable. For example, let's say you feel the pressure to host the perfect holiday gathering. Ask yourself, what does perfect really mean? Is it about catering a gourmet meal with flawless decorations? Or is it about spending quality time with the people you care about most? You see, when you redefine the goal, maybe it's having a relaxed dinner where everyone feels comfortable. It becomes less about perfection and more about that connection. And here's why this works. You see, when you set realistic, specific goals, you reduce the risk of burnout and disappointment, which is really key. And what you're doing is you're giving yourself permission to focus on what truly matters, not what looks impressive from the outside world, only what truly matters to you, which is hopefully aligned with your values, right? Next, let's talk about communication. And I'm big on communication. So many of the expectations we feel come from assumptions. The things we assume, things we think others want from us, but haven't actually discussed, right? Take the holidays again, for example. Maybe you feel obligated to buy expensive gifts for everyone in your family. But have you ever asked them how they feel about this here? I mean, you might find they prefer meaningful homemade gifts or even just time spent together. And that is how I am. I've always told my kids, don't buy me anything. Just spend your time with me, because here's what it means to me. You see, time is something we cannot get back. We cannot get more of, and it can be taken away from us at any point in our life. So to me, it's the most precious thing. Material items aren't as valuable to me as time spent with people I care about. So I would rather spend time with you, joking, having a meal, telling stories, or just sitting together on the couch and watching a movie. And here's how you can start these conversations, okay? You can say, I've been feeling a little overwhelmed with holiday planning. Would it be okay if we kept things simple this year? I mean, that's real easy, straightforward, right? I mean, it's the truth. Or you can say, instead of exchanging gifts, how about we focus on creating some shared memories? And let me tell you why this works. You see, when you communicate openly, you clear up misunderstandings and reduce the unnecessary pressure. And most importantly, it shows you're prioritizing authenticity over assumption. And that can inspire others, folks. It can inspire others to do the same thing. And let's talk about redefining success real quick. And this one's a game changer. You see, expectations often feel heavy because we're chasing someone else's version of success, whether it's society's, our families, or even an outdated version of our own expectations. And here's a helpful question to ask yourself. What does success look like to me right now? What does it look like to me right now? Because if you asked me 20 years ago, success would have been something different than it is right now today. So if you're working on a project at work, maybe success isn't about perfection. It's about delivering something thoughtful and, impactful to your boss or to your team. Or if you're hosting a holiday dinner, maybe success isn't about impressing your guests. It's about creating an atmosphere where everyone else feels at ease, which is impressive in itself, in my book of success, that is. Let me tell you why this here works. You see, when you define success on your own terms, you're basically taking back the power. It's no longer about meeting external standards. It's about aligning your actions with what truly matters to you, and again, your values. And gratitude is one of the simplest but most powerful tools for managing expectations, folks. And I'll tell you why. Because it shifts your focus from what's missing to what's already here. And here's a quick exercise you can try. Each night, write down 3 things you're grateful for. They don't have to be big. Maybe it's a good conversation, a warm meal, or a moment of laughter that you had during the day and you shared with family, friends, a child, whatever it might be. Because when you write down your gratitude, you're setting positive expectations. I even have a gratitude journal where I write something that I'm grateful for every morning when I wake up to set the tone of my day and my expectations for the day. So, for example, we're talking about the holidays still because we're in that holiday season. During the holidays, gratitude might look like, appreciating the time you get to spend with, loved ones, for example, instead of stressing over the perfect gift or decoration. And it works because gratitude rewires our brains to notice abundance instead of scarcity. You see, over time, it can help you let go of unrealistic expectations because you're focusing on what truly brings joy to your life, what brings happiness, versus what you don't have, which is bringing you misery or frustration or unmet expectations. And finally, self-reflection. And this is where you take the time to uncover the expectations that might be holding you back. And then you decide if they truly belong in your life. So try this exercise, okay? Write down one expectation that you've been carrying around recently with you. Ask yourself, where did this expectation come from? And does it align with my values? And what would happen if I let this expectation go? Or you can rewire the expectation, rewrite it for something else. For example, if you feel, pressured to buy expensive gifts, for example, ask yourself why. Why is it that I want to buy expensive gifts? Is it because, you value generosity, or because you feel obligated to meet a certain standard? If it's the latter, which is probably more likely than not, think about how you can show generosity in a way that feels authentic and manageable, and financially manageable too, not where you have to buy expensive gifts and then get frustrated or stressed out about it. You see, because reflection creates awareness, and awareness is the first step towards change. Once we're aware of what's going on with us, then we can begin to change. And when you understand where an expectation comes from, you're better equipped to rewrite it in a way that serves you better, that makes you better, that rewrites that script inside your head. So let's take a moment to imagine how these strategies might work in your life. Picture this. You're planning your holiday gathering. Okay. And you can picture anything else you want if it's not a holiday gathering. Maybe it's just a get together with friends. And instead of aiming for, the perfection, that Norman Rockwell painting type of holiday, you set a realistic goal to create a cozy evening with your immediate family. And this could be your loved ones, your mom, dad, aunt, uncle, someone that's people that are close to you. And then what you do is you communicate your plan openly, letting everyone know this year is about simplicity and connection. And you redefine success as enjoying meaningful conversations, basically, not impressing anyone with fancy decorations. I mean, you might want to put a few things up. That's up to you. But along the way, you practice gratitude for the time you get to spend together. And you reflect on how this approach aligns with your values. I mean, doesn't this sound a lot lighter? Doesn't it sound more intentional than trying to be fake and phony and put on this picturesque, event and affair and set these unrealistic expectations that just set you up for a stressful event and holiday? See, so these strategies really aren't about abandoning your expectations. They're more about managing them in a way that actually works for you, that aligns with your values, okay? So we're not saying get rid of expectations. We're just saying let's make them more manageable to where it does not impact you mentally or impact your health, increasing your stress levels and stuff like that. All right, so in the next segment, what we're going to do is we're going to tie everything together with some final thoughts and give you a simple tool to put these ideas into action. Stick around, folks. All right, folks, as we wrap up today's episode, let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've covered. Expectations. I mean, they're everywhere, right? Aren't they? They're shaping how we think, how we act, and even how we feel about ourselves. But here's the most important takeaway. Expectations don't have to define you. Let me say that again. Expectations don't have to define you. I mean, we talked about how these invisible rules are formed, through family, society, and culture, and how they get internalized over time. I mean, we've explored the emotional and mental toll they can take, and most importantly, we looked at practical strategies to break free from these expectations. And let me remind you of those strategies. Set realistic goals to ensure your expectations match your resources and your priorities. Communicate openly to reduce misunderstandings and unnecessary pressure. Redefine success on your terms, focusing on authenticity over perfection. Practice gratitude to center yourself and shift your focus to abundance. And finally, make time for self-reflection to uncover hidden expectations and decide whether they truly serve you. And these aren't just strategies for reducing stress. They're tools for reclaiming your life. And let me leave you with a quick story. You see, a good friend of mine once told me about a tradition she started during the holidays. I mean, she was feeling overwhelmed, by the pressures by the pressure to host, the big family gatherings every year that she did. And one December, after a particularly stressful season, she decided to change things up. Instead of preparing a huge feast, she invited her closest friends and family for a simple potluck. And, she didn't even worry about decorations or even cleaning every corner of the house. She just focused on being present with the people she loved. And you know what? It turned out to be one of the most meaningful holidays she'd ever had. People laughed. They had a good time. They shared stories from the past, about childhood, or even just last year's vacation. And they even stayed late into the night, more so than they would typically. And then she realized that, the joy wasn't in meeting some idealized version of the holidays. It was in letting go of the expectations that didn't matter and focusing, well, on what did. And that's the power of breaking free. It's not about lowering your standards. It's about finding what truly brings you joy and leaning into it. Now, if you're ready to put these ideas into action, don't forget to download the free worksheet I mentioned earlier. It's designed to help you identify, evaluate, and rewrite the expectations in your life. You'll find the link in the show notes, and trust me, it's a simple but powerful tool to help you take that next step. Hey, I want to thank you for listening, and I'll catch you on the next podcast.